firstly, how would you characterise New Zealand's housing situation? Do you think it's a problem, a shortage of supply, a crisis?
Well, it's clearly a shortage of supply in the right places. I mean, if you want to buy a brand new house in Pegasus, in Canterbury, or in Wanaka, and you want a Kiwi build, basically they're dollars for donuts. They're everywhere. Just can't be sold. But if you need a house, a good house, that's not too expensive, that is reasonable quality in Auckland, you've got a problem. And that problem is not enough supply. And that supply was something that we were starting to deal with, and we had 27,000 houses in the pipeline when we left office. But things like the special housing areas, the SHAs, they were working, and the government came in and said, we don't like that, wasn't our idea, gone.
Well, I mean, so this is the difficulty which no doubt you face, is that New Zealand has a shortage of supply. And
in certain places,
right, and National was in power for 9 years, and this government is trying all sorts of things to try to alleviate some of that pressure. I just wanted to go through a couple of things that Urban Development Minister Phil Twyford has put in motion, and the new Housing Minister Megan Woods is picking up, to get your thoughts. Firstly, there's Kāinga Order. So just for people listening, there's a piece of legislation that's been introduced to Parliament whereby the government, if it passes, the government will have the ability to say, look, we want to speed up development in this area. We want to do a large scale development. We've got developers, private sector, whatever, and we're going to speed through some of the consenting. And so that means that central government essentially will have quite a bit of power.
Yep. Nothing
what
wrong
are your
with
thoughts on that?
Well, we supported it. So it's no different really than a special housing area, and what it does mean is that you need to actually do this, otherwise you can't get the supply. So we have supported that, and for the first reading and going to select committee. My concern is, and I'm sure it's one shared by many people, that if you're going to compulsorily take people's land, that you need to have a mechanism to properly pay them, which I understand is going to be something along the Public Works Act, a mechanism, which is fine, except for this, that if the Kāinga Ora do not use the land for which it was taken for housing, there is no right in that bill for people to have the first right of refusal to get it back, which I think is a wrong, but we'll still support it to the first reading. We'll thrash it out in select committee.
Okay. Another thing is a bill that's being taken to Parliament whereby the government will be able to approve, will be able to say that infrastructure can be funded in a certain area by levying the homeowners in that area. So that's what's happening up north in Mildale. People are paying $1,000 a year, and that'll increase by 2.5% a year, and that money will be used to service to provide infrastructure. Are you supportive of this?
Well, it was actually, Mildale was under national, so it was a national scheme, and Phil Twyford's come to it with alacrity, and he loves it, and I think it's a good thing to do, as long as people understand what they're buying into, and as long as people get the infrastructure that they're supposed to have. That's one of the big issues that we need to deal with, so I don't have any problem with that.
Okay. The bill says, so in Mildale it's a new development, so if I buy a house...
Mildale was approved under this,
okay, but what I mean is that if I buy a house, I know that the deal is that I have to pay this levy every year, right? In the bill, the proposal is for that levy to be able to be applied to existing homeowners. So if I already own a house,
that's hard.
Then the government can say, "Yep, you need to start paying $1,000 a year."
That is much harder, and that's much harder, and we'll no doubt discuss that once it gets we move on a little bit further with the bill. But that's much harder when you're saying to people who have existing infrastructure, "Oh, by the way, now you get to pay for this." So. But understand this too, and on the other side, and it's not my job to defend Phil Twyford, definitely not, you're going to pay for roading or whatever else as well, but this is often about getting the underland services put in place, such as sewage and water. And if you don't pay for it in one way, you'll pay for it another, which will be either the developer will have to somehow get the money together, and that price, it will go on top of the house price as well. So we'll look at that, but I'm far more comfortable with people knowing what they're buying, getting what they're buying, and then paying for it.
Okay, and look, something else is, do you support the concept of an underwrite. So it's been widely talked about that it's sometimes in developers' interest to build bigger houses on bigger sections because that's a more profitable solution, which is possibly why we don't have as many low-cost, dense houses. So the idea that this government has been to say, look, developers, you build the sorts of houses that we want, and if they don't sell, we will buy them. So provide that sort of backing.
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it
concept?
Clearly hasn't worked because if the houses are in the right place, in the right configuration, at the right price, they will sell. Otherwise, don't build them because there's clearly no demand for them. I mean, the developers that I've discussed this with, I just said to them, look, gosh, you've got this bank of fill and you must be laughing all the way to the bank. They are laughing all the way to the bank. They can build houses that Phil decides they want, and the market doesn't even get a say in it until it comes time to suddenly buy them. We've got houses sitting around now, Kiwi-built homes, never been lived in, and the Housing New Zealand, or that Kaingora part of state housing, has said they're not suitable for state houses. So we've got houses that are just sitting there. So these are the ghost homes, except they've got no ghosts in them.
Yeah, well, that does seem quite ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
So I would say you're far better to contract with a developer to build a certain number of houses. If you want to build those houses for community or state or social housing of some form, go ahead and do it. If you want to build it so you want to help developers to get ahead in this, actually the really good developers are doing them anyway, and some of the developers who have been able to take assistance from the Bank of Phil are just laughing at them.
Would you scrap the concept of a government underwrite?
Yeah, it'd have to be a very compelling reason for the National Party to be underwriting developers building houses for the private sector when the private sector may not want those houses in the first place, and that's the problem for KiwiBuild.
The new Housing Minister, Megan Woods, has acknowledged that basically because Phil Twyford was just aiming for numbers, there's massive targets, basically is just willing to underwrite any old house to put some runs on the scoreboard, basically. Megan Woods has said, no, we're going to scrap the targets and try and be a bit more sensible about the locations of houses. If you were in government and you could have a bit more control over housing, so you could say, oh, actually, Mount Roskill, for example, that might be a good place or something like that.
I think we already did, yeah.
Yeah. Would you underwrite in that circumstance?
Well, I don't see that there's a need to. We get around 40,000 houses are built every year by the private sector without the government poking its nose in. The best thing that we could do to encourage that development and more of it would be to reform the RMA and the planning rules that go with it. If we could do that, we could save developers and therefore the purchasers money, because it would be saving time, we'd be saving consultants' fees, we'd be saving uncertainty.
Yep.
That's the best thing we can do. As for underwriting, going around underwriting every developer around the place who wants to build houses, no, probably not.
Sure.
But I'd be very happy to talk to developers about state housing, community housing, social housing, getting it built where it needs to, and you can do it by that way instead.
Foreign buyer ban, what would National do with that?
Oh, well, we've just left it as it is. From I think the foreign buyer ban, what Labour proposed and did in the beginning of their term, they had to backtrack pretty fast because of what happened on apartment buildings. Suddenly apartment buildings stopped. But we haven't made any decisions that I'm aware of
Right,
yet
so that's
on that.
staying.
So no, it's not staying at all. I'm just saying we haven't actually made any announcements on that yet.
Okay.
But I think what is really important to understand is that we now have almost 15,000 people, families waiting on the State House waiting list.
Sure.
There were 4,000 when we left office. So all the nonsense about, well, you got rid of state houses, sorry,
Yeah.
you can't have it triple and then blame us for it.
Okay, so the foreign buyer ban is staying until you announce that
it's
it might
not.
go.
It's not for me to announce,
Okay.
and these
Sure.
are announcements that we made prior to the election.
Okay, bright line test. Would you keep it?
Well, we brought it in.
Yeah, but would you
I think
keep
the
it
5
at
years is
5
ridiculous. I think the 5 years is ridiculous.
So you'd bring it back to 2?
We'd need to actually say what is the effect of this. What I'm seeing is a lot of people gone to a lot more expense to deal with houses. The best thing we can do for any housing supply is to free up the RMA, free up planning, let people get on and get houses built. That's the secret. Everything else is tinkering.
Okay, you're confident you can pull that off because you've been saying we've been talking about this for years and there has not been
I've only
yet
had
consensus.
this portfolio for 18 months, and we
Sure.
are now in a position where we have now across the board acceptance that the RMA is not working for anybody, and that we need to change it. This is a huge
Yeah.
development step forward. We have peace breaking out between the environmental groups and the developer groups. This is a time to make hay.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
Do house prices need to come down?
Well, it depends where you are, doesn't
Auckland.
it? If you, well, I'd say that many people would say that house prices are far too expensive in Auckland for what you get. And I'd also say it depends which parts of Auckland you're talking about. But if you want to live in the best and most accessible part of town, closest to all the amenities, right by the water, you're going to pay a significant lot more than you are somewhere else. But in general terms, of course, our house prices are far too expensive when you consider our income. So
Sure.
we're around 8 times our income to get a house in Auckland, where many other jurisdictions it's
not
3
more.
or 4 times. It is ridiculous, and it's all since the RMA. So it doesn't matter what you want to talk about. If we don't sort the RMA, then housing is stuffed.
Sure.
That's it.
Judith Collins,
Thank
thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm Janae Tibshirani from interest.co.nz.